And I would especially like to welcome our honourable guests, members of the House, representatives of the House, members of Parliament, the EITI Secretariat, and obviously a very warm welcome to civil society, and especially a very warm welcome to all the Publish What You Pay members. It's always lovely to come back to Indonesia and see the progress that civil society, and especially Publish What You Pay under leadership of Mariati, has made in the last couple of years. My compliments. You may already know me. My name is Marinke Van Riet, and I try to lead the Publish What You Pay global civil society movement that is now over 800 members strong in 62 countries. And in 41 countries we have what's called a Publish What You Pay national coalition. So that's really national groups that come together to extract the truth, to extract the future. You may be less familiar with our Vision 2020, and that's why I wanted to present this slide. The Vision 2020 not only refers to the year 2020, but also to the Vision 2020, the perfect eyesight, which we will get as a result of all of our campaigning activities to get more transparency and accountability in the gas, oil and mining sector. And this Vision 2020 is basically that we want to see a world where all citizens, so women, men, youth, especially in extractive regions, benefit from their natural resources, not only today, but also tomorrow. And this is particularly important because these resources are non-renewable, so we need to be very conscious of the fact that future generations should also benefit from these natural resources in various shapes or form. Let me move on to the second slide. And I only have two. I'm not going to bore you with a long presentation. This is Frank Zappa. I don't know who is old enough to know Frank Zappa, but Frank Zappa is a hard rocker from the United States, from the 60s. I'm not necessarily a fan of hard rock music. I don't know his music very well, but I really like his slogan. Without deviations from the norm, progress isn't possible. And think about it, it's very much in line what Publish What You Pay has been doing since its foundation in 2002, when the whole notion of revenue transparency was so foreign, was such a revolutionary concept. But we had to deviate, because without that deviation, progress wasn't possible. And I just wanted to show you how in those, well, now 13 years, we have been deviating from the norm, and we need to deviate a little bit more in order to get a fully transparent and accountable extractive industry. So the first idea, which I already mentioned, was the idea of revenue transparency. Revenue transparency, most revenues from the extractive industry were opaque. People didn't really know how much the extractive industry was gaining and giving benefits to the citizens as well as to governments. So, and that was the whole notion based on which the Publish What You Pay campaign was founded. Let's make sure that companies publish what they pay. Let's make sure that governments publish what they receive. And we did that through two approaches. The first one is the voluntary approach through the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. The EITI is really important because it brings together stakeholders and it gives civil society an equal seat at the table with industry and with governments. It's now implemented in 49 countries. Malawi was the last one, and it's really has become the global extractive industry transparency standard. And it's no longer just about revenue transparency. It's about much more. Since the new standard was adopted in 2013, really it touches upon a lot more elements in the value chain. But there's still some downsides with a voluntary approach. It depends too much on political will. The EITI data are still 2 years old. So we also have been pushing for regulations, for mandatory disclosures, both at an international level. We have Dodd-Frank Section 1504. We have the EU Transparency and Accounting Directives. We have the Canadian Transparency Law, Norwegian Transparency Law, and there's even some movement in Switzerland and Australia. These transparency laws means that all listed companies, and in the European Union also the registered companies, have to publish all their payments to the governments, not only at a country level, but also at a project level. And we're going to see the first disclosures of those data, particularly in the European Union, early next year. And in fact, next week, we have the launch of the Publish What You Pay Data Extractors program, where we're going to start preparing the Publish What You Pay coalition on how to use that data for national advocacy. So revenue transparency has now really become a mainstream development approach. It's out of the ghetto, as one of our African coordinators calls it, and into mainstream development. The other notion that we've been campaigning about was contract transparency, following the premise, the mandate of Publish What You Pay, that natural resources are a public good. They belong to the people. They need to be managed in the interest and for the benefit of the people. So contracts are also a public good. And you see that notion in more and more countries. Like the primary example is Niger in West Africa, where contract and revenue transparency are enshrined in their new constitution, which was adopted in 2010. So all contracts automatically in the open. There are no confidentiality clauses, there are no commercial aspects, it's a public good, and it actually enhances trust. It enhances the social license to operate. We know that Indonesia is still sort of having debates around contract transparency, but according to civil society, please put your contracts out in the open and let civil society assess whether the country is getting a fair deal for its natural resources. So what is happening as a new frontier as a result of both revenue transparency as well as contract transparency? The notion of a fair deal is slowly but surely gaining momentum in the Publish What You Pay movement, as well as beyond. And what is this notion of a fair deal? It's got three critical components. Fair deal is also the notion of including social and environmental cost as a fiscal cost. Civil society in Latin America is really campaigning quite hard to include social and environmental costs into the EITI. There is much a fiscal cost as revenue payments are. Then secondly is, as a result of revenues being out in the open, as a result of contracts being out in the open, the whole notion of tax justice and appropriate fiscal regimes. And I'm very much hoping that that will be discussed today as well. What is an appropriate fiscal regime? What is an appropriate revenue sharing tool to make sure that citizens, both at national level, but also at community level, are really being compensated appropriately, revenues are being shared appropriately to make sure that everyone benefits from their natural resources. Like, for example, the EITI report in Tanzania showed very clearly that the biggest taxpayer, the biggest contributor to the extractive industry are the employees through the pay-as-you-earn, rather than through corporate taxes. Is that a fair deal? Or is that actually a bad deal because countries are giving away their natural resources through excessive fiscal holidays, through excessive tax breaks, or through very aggressive tax planning? And this is something more and more civil society organizations are concerned about. And then the third element around fair deal is the issue of beneficial ownership. Beneficial ownership is who are the true owners of the companies. Not the legal owners, the true owners of the companies. And this beneficial ownership is gaining more momentum also in the G20 context. Mo Ibrahim, who's very active in the B20, in the Business 20, has made beneficial ownership his personal goal, his personal mantra. In the EITI, what has happened in 2013 is that beneficial ownership was adopted as an encouragement. And actually, it was supposed to be a requirement in January 2016, so only 2 months away, conditional on the results of a pilot study. And that pilot study has been done in 12 EITI implementing countries, and it's quite encouraging. It's quite a challenging concept, beneficial ownership, because a lot of the governments found it very, very difficult to even understand the concept of beneficial owners. So in a lot of the pilot countries, they actually disclose the legal owner. It's not the legal owner, it's the beneficial owner, the true physical person behind a company. So now we're having quite strong debates in the EITI board on what to do with beneficial ownership. Does it need to become a requirement in January 2016, or are we giving more time to the EITI implementing countries to play with this topic a little bit more? From Publish What You Pay's perspective, it's very clear it should be a requirement, and the onus should not be on the governments to find out this information. The onus should be on the companies to simply disclose this as part of their EITI reporting template. And I'm very much looking forward to discussing this topic in the course of today, and I'm also going to be with the Publish What You Pay members in their General Assembly the coming days. So on that note, I encourage everyone to deviate today, to extract the future, to extract the truth, and to extract our mindset. Terima kasih.